Good afternoon, good morning. We are live and we are seeing people join. Awesome.
Yeah, welcome, everyone.
Welcome in.
We'll just give a couple moments to let everyone filter in, and we will start in a second. Hope everyone's day is going well so far. I don't actually know if we have chat or not, so we might have to just use Q&A for any questions or anything like that, but we have set up the Q&A so that you can add questions, upvote things, and we can make sure that we can have a discussion as needed.
Yeah, we do not have chat enabled, but as Tom said, we do have Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in Q&A. We do have time reserved at the end. So if you see another question that interests you, feel free to go ahead and upvote that. If you don't like it, you can downvote it as well. But either way, we're going to do our best to get through all the questions at the end. And for any useful links or things that we need to push out to you, we'll be using the chat feature. Right. We're a couple minutes in. We've still got some people in the process of joining, so we'll give it about another minute. And then we'll go ahead and kick things off. I hope everyone's having a great day. For anybody curious, the weather in Cleveland is quite annoying. Could be worse, but it's this weird like rain starts for 2 minutes and then stops for another 20. And I think that the three of us here are hopped up on enough sugar that we will happily keep you entertained for the next hour.
We'll do the best we can. I will say the background behind you, Meredith, is actual Cleveland background that is not photoshopped in, so it appears somewhat sunny
That's a lie.
for this
Yeah.
time.
I mean, it is daytime. I wouldn't give it sunny.
Okay,
I'll give it its daytime.
we'll take it. We take all the daytime we can get here. For those of you who are joining from places that are nicer, it's happy to see you.
Our condolences on viewing Cleveland.
Yes. But we have this lovely wall here behind us that will never change. So if you can watch Meredith's background for the more entertaining outside.
That being said, it looks like we've got a bunch of attendees who've now completed joining. So we can go ahead and kick off our Q2 webinar here. Today's webinar will be on risk-based learning with Aaron and Tom as your hosts. I'm more here just as an MC to run the webinar, cause a little chaos in the background, but I'll pass it off to Tom and Aaron.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Meredith. We are looking forward to our Q2 webinar here on RBA, and just really excited to talk about all of the exciting things you can do with that. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, you work for some sort of organization, and this organization probably has some users.
Probably a lot of users.
Yeah, probably a lot of users. And one of the things that happens in an organization that has users, you have alerts.
Too many.
Too many alerts, often too many. Often those alerts are the result of other users in your environment.
People love clicking stuff they shouldn't.
Yes. And whether or not it's via their best intention or not, they still result in there being some activity that occurs. So you have users, you have alerts, you have users causing alerts. how do you prioritize those alerts across those users? How do you know if the person that's clicking on someone just didn't have enough coffee in the morning, is a low level employee that doesn't have a lot of access, not the big deal?
Mhm.
Or is this a targeted phishing campaign against your CIO?
One is a little more urgent.
Yeah, one's a little bit more urgent, but how do you identify maybe someone forgot to change a password somewhere, or maybe they got their machine compromised and it's actually malicious behavior and they're pivoting through a network via a third party malicious actor?
Yeah, and it just isn't feasible to look through each and every single authentication failure, as much as we'd all love to be able to. So you need other ways to actually like narrow down and correlate other suspicious behavior.
Yeah. So let's think about the case of a user that, you know, they show up to work on Monday. They had a long weekend doing whatever you do on the weekend. What happens?
Probably mistyped their password.
Yeah.
It's early. They haven't had coffee.
They haven't had their legally required 7 cups of coffee yet. So, yeah, fat finger their password, fail to log in. Is that a cyber attack?
Nope.
No, not a big deal. What about okay, they had, their PCI mandated 90-day password rotation. They added the season or the another letter or number at the end of their password. Perfectly reasonable password management strategies that no one would ever do. But now something is failing to log in every time it tries to load because they saved their old password in there. Is it a cyber attack?
No, but it's a misconfiguration
Yeah, it's
issue.
something we got to deal with, but it's not the same as maybe something suspicious.
Right.
So we have our benign categories where simple password error, not enough coffee, expired safe credentials, common things that you'll see. Not necessarily I need to cause everyone to jump out of their seats and solve this problem immediately because it's not an active threat.
Right.
But you also have the cases of something suspicious where, maybe that person over the weekend, they left their laptop around, they securely had their password on a sticky note on the bottom of their laptop that someone picked up and then took, and now they've outsourced their work to a third-party service provider of the malicious type.
Yeah.
So,
Our favorite.
yeah, they could be, connecting to a VPN, scoping out, testing access, trying a bunch of different things. And if you have someone who's in accounting who's now trying to access every single network share, might be a little bit outside of the norm.
Just a little.
Likewise, hey, that account's compromised. This could also be something that's maybe not a stolen account credential, but let's just say they submitted a ticket. Hey, I can't get to this thing. Your help desk was helpful, added them to the admins group. They don't have a single darn access issue anymore. They can get to everything, but that's also a problem. So we want to be able to identify those sorts of things.
It's important to correct and audit for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we deal with that? Well, are we going to look at every alert every time someone fails to log in?
Not possible. It really isn't. And it works out better for you if you can actually build out a profile of the user activity and kind of have everything in one pane of glass. So, that failed authentication, maybe not a big deal, but if it's paired with, their MFA also got changed and they logged in and they're an accounting user who's now using PowerShell. We want to see that. We want the full context of each stage as it's moving along.
Yeah, and what we want to do is build a profile of our assets.
Yes.
Whether this user normally does this activity for their job, and are they going to do something outside of that norm? Is a higher priority asset or something that's more critical a system that is being potentially used in a way that's abnormal or a security issue?
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of RBA is it really allows you the flexibility of being able to adjust like risk score based on things like, is the user in a privileged admin group? Are they, is it a critical host that they're trying to access? You can increase the score for that, those kinds of things. Customizability, always a great thing to have.
Yeah. And that's really one of the awesome things about risk-based alerting RBA. And that's where it comes into play. So let's talk about RBA. We gave you a little bit of a teaser for it, but that's what we're going to be covering over the next half hour or so. So first, we obviously have an overview, but we're going to talk about the implementation of RBA, how you actually set it up, what steps you do after you implement it. We're going to walk through an example using data that you may or may not have in Splunk, but we'd like to see you have in Splunk. And then we'll talk about some of the next steps after you get that going, and also leave the floor open for any questions. So because we have Q&A, I'm just going to pop up a little poll right now to get a sense from the audience about what you're looking to do. So I'll just launch that real quick. Basically, we're looking to see, are you currently using RBA right now, or you're interested in deploying it? So just go ahead and answer that question, and we'll see, what our audience is interested in. So right now, overwhelming majority is interested in deploying RBA, so you're going with yes for the second answer, which is good. You're at the right webinar. It looks like we're at a pretty even split between who's using RBA and who isn't right now. So for those of you using RBA, hopefully this will be something that's a review, but also you'll be able to take some new insight away from it from our perspective. And if you're not, you can see what the cool stuff is.
Yeah, just real quick disclaimer. I know ES8 is going to be a large change for pretty much everyone. We're not going to go specifically into ES8 for this. I feel like RBA for that's going to be its own separate discussion, but the core principles that we're going to discuss today still apply.
Excellent. So, without further ado, who the heck are these people? Well, the only person you really should be listening to is Erin, because she is our SOC architect and she knows what she's talking about here, which is why we bring her on the webinar. So, Erin.
Great. Hi, my name is Erin Call. I've been with Hurricane Labs for about 3 years now. As a SOC architect, I work with clients, making recommendations, engineering new detections, deploying them, tuning them, all that fun stuff that's SOC related. I have also handled multiple RBA conversions for clients at this point, which is always a fun process to go through.
Awesome. And we're happy to have you here and thank you for being on the webinar. And then me, I'm Tom. I'm a director of technical operations. I'm primarily more focused on the Splunk side, but like to also get my feet wet and experience in the security side as well. And have learned a lot about RBA while preparing with this, but Erin's the person to listen to. And then Meredith.
I'm Meredith. I'm the director of technical services here. Way back when I was fun and cool and technical, I also did some RBA conversions and I'm very much an RBA nerd, but I'm mostly just here to run the webinar and build some Legos.
Awesome. And Meredith will be helping coordinate Q&A, so we'll keep that open. Feel free to throw questions in there as they come to you, and we will make sure we get time to tackle all of those for you. So, what is RBA? Well, let's ask the RBA expert here.
Well, there's a lot of benefits to doing risk-based analysis. You're instead of looking at 5 separate alerts for the same user, but different activity, it's all going to be condensed down to one alert. Which is great. Alert fatigue, big thing that we talk about in the industry. So that helps a lot with this. It also helps in terms of if 5 different analysts each got one of those, the activity on its own may not look suspicious, but when, in the context of all of those rules alerting, it's something to be concerned about. It also allows us to be a little more, customize those activity, if your admin are doing admin tasks, you probably don't want it alerting every single time on that. But if they, do what looks like a normal admin task on top of a bunch of other suspicious behavior, you'll still see that. In one-to-one alerting, you'd probably be stuck just completely excluding that admin user just to get volume down to a reasonable level. And that's just, it's doable. It's not great, in terms of trying to identify insider threats and that kind of behavior. It also gives us more flexibility in terms of these extremely high volume, low fidelity detections, say like MFA change. Those would be awful for a one-to-one detection. You can't do it. But you can still have them set like very low risk score. MFA change is set to 5 when we deploy it. So it doesn't ever generate its own alert, but it does provide context, um, in one spot when other rules alert.
And the thing I really love about, what we've been talking about RBA, it lets you take all that data that you're collecting into your sim and use it as either context or something that contributes to an alert. So it's
Yeah.
not just like you're looking for one specific bad thing. You can have a combination of a bunch of different contributing things to eventually end up to be one bad thing. And it really gets you a lot more value out of the data you have in your
Yeah.
sim. So that is something that's been really interesting and awesome to see.
Yeah, and it also can help, like, pretty much everyone's worried about costs, right? So SVC being high, trying to keep things down to fewer detections, right? So like extra hop, you might have a detection for each signature you want to cover for one-to-one alerting, but when you switch to RBA, you could just put them all together and adjust the risk score within the correlation search itself based on each signature. And that, you know, save you a little money, makes it a little easier, and you're still getting all that information that you need.
Yeah, for sure. So let's break down the process of developing an RBA implementation and how we go from we're going to write a search to detect something, how we make it a risk search, and then turn it eventually into a ticket that is requiring client action.
Right. So while the base of it is going to be your risk rules. So these are correlation searches. It's typically how we built them out with the risk analysis adaptive reaction attached to it. The correlation search, like our one-to-one alerting, most clients content as well. Like it's as simple as add a risk action to the correlation search and you're good to go on RBA. Uh, but sometimes, yeah, you might want to edit that correlation search because, ideally you're getting down to like a core user or host as your risk object, right? So with that risk action, anytime that alert would go off as a one-to-one, instead it's writing to the risk index. And then we have a core search that looks back 24 hours and looks for where activity for a risk object has hit 100 or higher. Uh, that's when it goes over to our SOC and our analysts get to investigate. There's a nice link to the dashboard. It lists all the rules that fired as well as links to the drill downs for the activity.
Yeah, and when you see those things, you not only have the activity, but you also have breakdown of the contributing events.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot easier, like just from an analyst perspective, to be able to have that all in one place, especially when you're trying to very quickly get information over to the client. You don't want to be leaving stuff out, especially in terms of if it is malicious activity, we want you to be able to clean up after it very quickly, isolate it, whatever the case, right? So having it in one place and not spread out over several different tickets is useful.
Yeah. So next, let's take a look at how a risk rule actually comes to be. So how do we build one out? What are the things that we need to have as components of that?
Right. So starting with your search logic, again, just your standard SPL. If you really want to go in depth with trying to adjust risk score based on things within the data, like, critical priority host and admin user, you can do all that within the core search logic there. Uh, from there, the adaptive action, you're going to set your risk object and your risk score through that. For the most part, you can assign multiple risk objects, but typically it's most likely going to be a user and host are going to be your two most seen ones. And then from there, threat objects also an option. You set the field in there, say like over the last 7 days, the same hash was seen on like 60 different computers or, something like that. Someone's been downloading something they shouldn't in multiple places. That's where the threat object comes in and can pull that all together instead of basing it on like this one user did this.
And I would imagine that some of those threat objects are going to be things that have a higher risk score than other ones based on how bad the threat is, right?
Yeah, and you can get fancy with it. Like we have our threat feed, which provides weighting for, IP IOCs primarily. But you could use that to adjust the risk score on the detection as well. Like, hey, this was weighted at 98. Let's, set that as the risk score or add 50 to the risk score.
The other thing I really like here is the idea of the impact of the detection and the confidence. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but like
Mhm.
the idea that there are assets in an environment that have higher criticality than others, and your alerting should be able to adjust to that.
Exactly. Yeah, like looking at critical infrastructure, you absolutely want to, you want to see those alerts coming in. You want them to be analyzed quickly and gotten to you quickly so you can take action. But something where it's like a low level user who, has no admin access to anything and, just maybe screwed up trying to log in that day, that's less exciting. Not really strictly necessary to get through that as quickly as possible or, without additional indicators of compromise, it's not necessary to even look at it. So,
Yeah, I think let's try to visualize that a little bit here because I think this is a really good breakdown of how you rank the different severities and how that translates more into a number.
right. So this is actually a little chart that's within the Splunk documentation, but just a little prettier than the standard one. So the point of this is that when you're deciding risk score, you're trying to look at a balance between impact and confidence. So impact being like how much is this going to affect your organization? Is this a detection for something that would take out a domain controller? You're going to be up on the high extreme end, right? um, but something that is, you know, little less like of a high impact, maybe, like vulnerability scanner, more down at like a lower medium. Uh, and then the other side of it is your confidence. So that's going to be like how high is this going to be in terms of false positives? Is it super high fidelity? Like if I have a break glass account, a detection for any time someone logs into that, that's probably going to be super high fidelity. You need to look at that every single time. So you're going to set it to a higher, if not a 100 risk score.
And that breakdown of different things, how you can see different confidence levels, that's really how we can adjust how those alerts actually happen.
Yeah, and this is like realistically speaking, this is just a guideline. It's a good starting point for how to think about like where you want to assign those values. But every organization is going to have different priorities. They're going to have different things that they absolutely have to see every single time. So these are their starting point. You don't have to strictly follow that.
And that's where we can be flexible based on your organization needs and like what is actually critical.
Exactly.
So as we implement RBA, as someone who's done this quite a few times, how do we end up approaching that? Like customer has existing alerting, they want to move to RBA, what do?
Right. Well, the important thing is keeping it seamless, right? We don't want a downtime in your alerting. So we, as part of our alerting structure, we use an alerting lookup, and that's going to tell whether each different correlation search should be alerting to our SOC or not. So initial deployment is as simple as adding a risk alerting column to that, and setting it to tuning for all of your alerts that are one-to-one live alerting. From there, we're deploying our RBA-based package. So that's going to have our core risk score exceeded rule, a tuning risk score exceeded rule, a look back over 7 days rule, and our RBA tuning dashboard. At that point, I will typically run a report of all of the live one-to-one alerts, see which ones already have a risk score and a risk object assigned to them. I make a suggestion based on, where I think the ones that don't have that should be, I send that over to the client. They get to review it. They can, make that choice, ask me to make adjustments from there. Um, and then from there, we let it do its thing for a little bit, and then we use the RBA tuning dashboard to go in and see like, hey, like this is generating X amount of events, and that would have resulted in Y amount of alerts. So, you know, in most events, it's going to lower your overall volume. For the ones where the volume is still high, we will sprint those out in future sprints. Our sprint cycles are about a month long. So, we'll make those future sprint items for you. And as far as like RBA implementation itself, that's going to take a month. It replaces your usual sprint items for that month.
Do you find that's a pretty smooth transition for most of our clients?
Yeah, I haven't had any like major issues so far.
Okay, that's good.
It's been pretty seamless. I really like that we can do it in a way that doesn't take them down for hours.
Yeah, because obviously security alerting, critical service, we don't want to impact that, but we
Right.
still want to ramp things up to the next level and improve it.
Exactly.
So as we implement RBA and we break things down, like what's the logic for assigning risk scores? Do you just pick numbers out of a hat, or do you have a better process for that?
Well, aside from like the impact and confidence chart, just like more broadly speaking, I typically will not set searches, or I won't recommend searches be at 100 for a risk score, because those are always going to alert 1-to-1. But I do discuss with clients what alerts they feel are going to need that. Everyone has a little bit of different preferences on that. But it's still part of the overall RBA. You're still going to get any other rules that fired at the same time as that to add the context. So they're good, but you need to reserve it for higher fidelity, high priority searches. At 90, those are still your pretty high, like, higher fidelity. You definitely want to see it as long as something else also happened along with it. Um, so like maybe a brute force attack was successful. Maybe the brute force attack on its own wasn't a big deal, but they logged in and started, adding people to privilege groups. Those alert together.
Yeah, so a bunch of failed logins, a successful one, then something bad happened.
Yeah.
Clearly over 100 risk score at that point, and you're going to not only have the fact that this happened and the account was changed, but you're going to see all that context that led up to that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then at the bottom, score of 10, again, low fidelity, low severity. The MFA was changed. They single failed login. I still wouldn't even really do that as an RBA rule, but like you get the idea that those are the ones that are going to generate a lot of noise, but if in conjunction with other activity are worth knowing about.
Yeah, and I think these tens, that's the stuff traditionally you would never really get much of a security value out
Yeah.
of otherwise with traditional alerting, where with RBA, that's a huge amount of information and background that you have.
Yeah, exactly. Because like the low fidelity searches, they're still good to know. But if I sat down and I tried to go through every single MFA change in a day, that would be my whole job. And I probably still wouldn't get through all of them.
Yeah. And obviously no one has time to look at those, but having that context is super useful.
Yeah.
So when we actually turn these into alerts that go to a customer, like how do we make that happen?
Right. So these two get deployed as part of our RBA base package. The first one, the risk or exceed an object, that's going to be your core RBA detection through us. It's going to look back over 24 hours and add up the risk scores for the risk objects and alert on items of 100 or higher. And then the attack threshold exceeded over the last 7 days. That one is kind of more set up as a way to kind of identify low-grade reoccurring activity, especially as like attackers are trying to be as quiet as possible. They may not be meeting the thresholds for something to alert on its own, or generate a regular risk score exceed an object alert. But if it's happening over multiple days, you probably still want to look at it.
Yeah, and something like that where someone might compromise an account and do a low and slow period rollout over a period of time.
Exactly.
That's where traditional alerting might miss that entirely, whereas RBA can pick that up when you're looking over a longer time run.
Yeah, because if they're keeping like, like a brute force, right? If they're keeping their events under a specific amount, like it just looks like normal traffic at that point. There's no real way to, to make that determination, like with a correlation search, that is malicious activity specifically. So that this gives us an opportunity to have a little more visibility on things over time.
Yeah, definitely. Next, let's walk through an example of what like an alert process would look like with RBA, from the case of something bad happening to something really bad happening to you needing to do something about it. So let's look first at the idea of there's PowerShell. It was tested that it was executed on a host, or identified that it was executed on a host. Now, this also depends on user, so being context aware is going to be useful. So Jim from accounting, PowerShell running, probably not normal thing.
Nah.
Jim in
definitely
IT, yeah, that's normal.
That's his job
Everything he's
duty.
doing.
He's
Yeah.
just doing work. Yeah.
So that's something relatively low risk score, but still we could set that up where certain users are lower than others because of the likelihood of them running a tool.
Exactly.
Now, after that PowerShell is executed, we now have a detection for malware that occurs. So
maybe they use PowerShell to download something.
yeah.
And now they're trying to pivot.
Not like anyone would ever use PowerShell for downloading something or trying to pivot, but
hey, like one of the things with PowerShell, right, is like looking for stuff that people typically wouldn't do it that way, right? So, this kind of lets you make that tweak, especially because like there's so much like typical automated scripting going on in environments nowadays.
yeah. But that's kind of where that suspicious arguments comes into play. So you have a tool that's built in, probably going to be used for something. But when you start seeing arguments that you wouldn't normally see, like an encoded command, for example, now you're seeing, okay, PowerShell was turned on. We have some encoded commands. We have a malware detection. Oh, wait, right after that, now we're seeing an actual malicious credential dumping tool fire. Woo, we are over 100. We need to do something about that. So that triggers an alert.
Correct.
But unlike traditional alerting, where yes, we could have set this up where we get an alert, hey, you ran this credential dumping tool, this is a bad thing. We not only see this, but in that alert, we see all this context as well. So we see what arguments they ran, we see the RBA malware detection details, we also see the PowerShell execution. So you can not only see, hey, there was a tool run, but you see the arguments and what led up to it.
Right. Yeah. So you've taken 4 alerts, you've turned it into 1. And, analysts might have gotten those in one-to-one alerting and gone through them and said, hey, this looks fine, because they didn't have the wider context that you can get with RBA.
Exactly.
And then, if the activity continues, they're doing more stuff, they're messing with your privileged AD groups. Maybe they're trying to, exfil or connect to, a malicious server, something outside of your network. They've made a new user. So like those, that bottom row, it's going to generate its own alerts. So we've taken 7 separate alerts and made them into 2, and you're still getting, the broader picture as things are ongoing in terms of like what you need to go and triage.
Yeah, and you have a lot higher quality investigation because your analyst has more information, and you're also getting visibility into some things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise with just simple alerting.
Exactly.
So as we're looking to implement this, the actions that we take as, working with a client, you have an existing environment, it has alerts. How do you go to the RBA side of things?
Well, so HL repo items are going to have the risk action already attached. So there typically isn't a lot that needs to be done with those in terms of like client created content, or maybe you had a previous MSSP, you still have a bunch of their detections, that kind of thing. So, at that point, we're going to take a look and see risk object, risk score, suggestions, that sort of thing. And also adjust the search itself so that it can narrow down in on a risk object to identify that, or to do some basic math and adjust the risk score within the SPL itself. So, uh, yeah.
And then the other thing, like tuning, that's something
Yeah.
where like you obviously we always talk about the importance of tuning,
Mhm.
but it's still something that you have to do with RBA.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're not free of tuning.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That is just a ever-present fact of life when it comes to this, right? But you have more flexibility with customizing your risk scoring, which allows you to really get into the nitty-gritty, make sure that you have better coverage across the board. You're not just blanket excluding hosts and users from detections. It makes it a lot simpler, in my opinion, to deal with.
Yeah.
Maybe not to implement, but
But to use the example like Jim from IT using PowerShell as part of his job, you don't necessarily have to assign a risk score to that. You can tune it in such a way where that user just running PowerShell isn't a problem.
Yep.
But as soon as he's running PowerShell with an encoded command in there, that's going to bump things up to another level as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So you still get that context and you don't have to like exclude something entirely.
Yeah, 'cause that
Flexibility.
admin user probably uses PowerShell all the time. Why are they encoding it?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So does RBA work for everything? Can we just, go ahead and implement RBA for every single alert and the world is great?
I mean, you can, but again, it depends on your needs. So, part of it is with those risk scores set to 100 kind of alerts, those high fidelity, high impact detections that you need to always see. You can put those into RBA alerting and still get the context of the other RBA rules that go off. You can also still leave it one-to-one, but you're not going to get that additional context. So, there is kind of a bit of a trade-off there. Our automation is also built around, auto ticketing for one-to-one detections, not RBA alerting yet. So if you wanted it to automatically generate a ticket and go straight to you and to our SOC at the same time for additional investigation, one-to-one's probably the better way to go with that. But otherwise, like, yeah, you definitely can get the best of both worlds on that one.
Awesome. And I guess you can even just do the whole we set it to 100, it'll always alert sort of thing. And if you need something for compliance purposes or to fire a ticket, you
Yes.
can do that as well. I guess we can talk a little bit about some special handling use cases and where automation can come into play too to really accelerate response for something.
Right. Yeah, so I discussed that a little bit on the previous slide with the risk score of 100 versus, having it come in one-to-one. We do have clients that, they always want a phone call or they always want a ticket for something, super valid, especially like, someone made a change to your firewall. You probably want to know about that ASAP, for example.
I think the break glass account example where it's like if you have a break glass account that just never ever be used,
Yeah.
like if that's used, you need to know about it. That's something, fire a ticket immediately, send it to us to start investigating. You get
Yes.
both sides working at the same time.
Yeah, that's really important because the quicker that we get it to you, the quicker you can, handle it. And, at the same time, our analysts are working on additional context for you so that you have all the information you need as a result.
And that you can do for any of those sorts of things where you want to have something alert.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've spent whatever the past bit of time going through talking about the concepts of REA, how we implement it. Let's look at an example. So, yay, example time. Everyone loves examples. Well, I know some of you were on a previous webinar that we did in quarter one. If you didn't, we'll review a little bit, but we talked about using process logs and PowerShell transcript logs and how to use those for security use cases. So that was the webinar Meredith and I did back a couple months ago. We assume you've implemented a use case, you're tracking for suspicious activity in those logs in your environment, and let's talk about converting that to RBA and the benefits. To review though, different process activity can be suspicious. So like normal process activity, sure, there's a lot of that. But if you have like a scheduled task that gets added, if there's process masking that's occurring in your environment, if you have process sending network requests to random IPs, also could be bad.
Yeah.
So those sorts of process activity, often suspicious. Also, there could be activities in PowerShell logs that we could have seen associated with suspicious activity. I know we've talked about encoded commands a lot
Yeah.
just up to this point. Obviously,
It's
not
an easy
something.
example,
Yeah.
right? So
Not something you normally should see. If you have an admin that's doing that, they
Yeah.
can be dealt with there. But like hiding the window, running invoke command to invoke another command, all those sorts of things are often signs of something being done with PowerShell that's potentially a little questionable.
Yeah.
And like you don't want to alert in every occurrence. Like every time someone uses PowerShell, not the end of the world, not something that you really need to have, but who is using PowerShell can make a difference in what commands they're doing with that. So tracking the risk of each activity, using PowerShell, relatively low risk, but still something a little bit abnormal.
Yeah.
But starting to use PowerShell with different commands, definitely something you want to take some action on. So let's look at an existing use case. So the one that we set up in the last webinar, alerting in PowerShell encoded commands, we talked about that. You've already tuned this already. It's something where if you see there's an EC in your PowerShell transcript, that's something we need to figure out. You've already slapped the hand of the admins who like doing that for God knows why. But it's not a normal alert you see. That's something, there's an encoded command, something bad is happening. We'll set that risk score to 100. It will immediately fire an alert. Our SOC will investigate. You'll know this is something we need to look at.
Exactly.
But that's all that you were doing previously. We were just looking for encoded commands, and we had all this data that we're collecting into Splunk with other PowerShell things, which is useful information, but we're not actively alerting on it.
Right.
Let's leverage RBA here. So you have all this additional data. So like you can assign a risk score to, hey, someone sets the execution policy to bypass. That could be a 25 or something like that. PowerShell getting a file from an unknown IP. Like that's not the end of the world if you curl something just to download it. That's fairly normal. But if suddenly another process on your machine starts making connections out to that IP address at the same time, and it's a base 64 encoded thing that they ran to pull it down.
Yeah, you need to see that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
At that point, those 3 or 4 different things all combined together is something you need to take action on. And that's really where RBA comes into play.
Exactly.
And you're not taking like these individual things that you were, I wouldn't say ignoring, but not necessarily looking at until you got that one, encoded command alert. Now you have these 3 or 4 different things all as context and alert and be able to identify something. And you would still get an alert in that case, even without them doing an encoded command at all.
Exactly. And it's really helpful, especially because a lot of, PowerShell process detections, like we have a process creation, lateral movement detection. Those can be really noisy, just because of, how things have been configured on your organization's network. So RBA lets you have those and still benefit from them, but you're not also, tearing your hair out because you got 20 alerts in an hour.
Yeah, for sure. So to kind of bring things back all full circle, what is the point of all this? Why did we sit here for 40 minutes to talk about stuff? Well, Aaron, you used to be a SOC analyst. Now you're an architect.
Yep.
But one-to-one alerting, confirm or deny, made you cry yourself to sleep each night?
Maybe not every night.
Enough nights.
Enough nights.
So SOC analysts crying themselves to sleep. This is an RBA alert that we have. We don't want to have our analysts doing that, and we don't want our customers to be on the receiving end of alerts like that either.
Right.
So like if you're already a customer, and I see a bunch of you here in the attendee list, so thank you for showing up and for being a client and all of that. But if you're not already RBA, obviously this is something we'd like to encourage you to consider it. And you can also work with Erin and the rest of her team.
Or your architect, if
Yeah.
you have a different one.
But
So yeah, no, it's you're paying a lot of money for this service. You're paying a lot of money to work with us if you're a client. So let's you know, make sure that we're giving you that customized bespoke experience with your alerting, and make sure that we're really, drilling down to, actual actionable activity to look at.
yeah, and the thing I really like about RBA is it lets you maximize the value of the data that you're putting into your SIM. So, like we're collecting a ton of stuff. a lot of times you're only looking for very specific things, which obviously is great, but all that other data has value too. So
Right.
I know a lot of times you get worried like, what bad stuff am I missing? I want to have more alerts so that I can find more things.
Mhm.
RBA really allows you to harness the power of that data and gets actionable security value out of something that you might not be looking at right now.
Exactly. Because maybe you have logs for badge swipes into your office buildings. Like, there's no real good detection for one-to-one to write on that. But like, as an RBA rule, like this is the first time they've swiped into this building in X amount of days. Like, hey, that's context.
Yeah.
That's that kind of stuff is useful. So, we all have various source types that are easier to work with than others. Some are quite a bit noisier. So this lets you benefit from all of it without starting to cut things out.
Yeah. And RBA, it really does turn chaos into context. So the chaos of all those logs you have,
Yeah.
it gives you context of what's going on. It gives us context when we're investigating alerts, and it's really a great way to harness the power of all that data you're collecting.
Yeah, it's a little bit like getting the book instead of just a chapter of the book. So you get the full story, or at least the beginning of the ongoing story.
Exactly. So if you need help, if you found this interesting, if you want to deploy RBA, if you just want to explore more, obviously we can help. You could get to work with Aaron or one of the other lovely SOC architects that we have who deploy RBA and work with it on our clients.
Mhm.
With that said, we will open the floor for any questions that you have, and we'll have Meredith help coordinate that.
Yep, at this point, we don't have any questions yet. But if anybody has any, feel free to either throw them in Q&A or throw them in the webinar chat, and we'll get those answered.
And also, if anyone has any thoughts or topics that they'd like us to consider for future webinars, we'll take ideas as well. This was definitely a popular one, especially after the security use case one. We've had a lot of people ask for RBA, so we made it happen. We listened to the people who show up to these webinars.
Well, I mean, it helps if the webinars is something people care about, right? So,
Yep.
Exploring new things with Splunk and improving your alerting structure is always going to be a good deal.
Yeah. And
I'm still going to continue to vote for a Lego face-to-face. All right, we have our first question in from Rocio. And Rocio asks, are there indicators that my environment would be good for RBA?
Honestly, I would say pretty much everyone would benefit from it, in different ways, right? So if I have a much smaller organization, maybe they only have a couple of people on their team to look at these alerts as they're coming in. So they really want to reduce that volume. RBA absolutely does that for them. Say I have a larger client, they have a ton of content with us, they have a ton of users, there's just a lot going on. RBA would be useful for organizing that better, streamlining things for you, ideally cut down on uh, the waste of time, right? That is alert fatigue and um, investigating was just normal user behavior. So
And especially if you feel like you're not making the most of the data that you have or are concerned about missing things, that's a good sign that RBA would be a good next step.
right. And RBA, like honestly, the more rules that you have set up for it, the better. Just because then there's more points of data feeding into that risk score. So yeah.
As someone who brings data into Splunk a lot of times, I can get the data in there. A lot of times, like, what do I do with it? I'm like, Aaron, here's data, deal with it. And then you have to try to make sense out of all of that.
Always a good time. But it's just it's a different, piece of the overall puzzle, each detection. So putting it together really helps a lot. Any other questions?
All right, we've got another question in from Ro, and Ro asks, does your risk model help detect or show subtle behaviors? For example, a chain of benign events that in aggregate resemble reconnaissance or privilege abuse?
Right, so the core risk score search is going to look back over 24 hours and add things up. So if you have a whole bunch of little events that are, they're 10, 25, maybe risk score, if there's enough of that going on, yeah, it will add up into an alert. But in terms of slow, subtle tends to be spread out more over days, right? And that's where that other one, looking back over 7 comes in to really pick up, you know, different, more subtle activity from a user or host that needs to be looked into.
Awesome. I'll just throw one out there myself. Do you ever assign a 0 risk score to things?
Oh, I don't think we have a 0, but we have a 1, and that's for some of our dynamic threat feed items, because they're really more just there to provide context on an IP and whether it's malicious or not. So those are just purely informational, and it's not something that we do a whole lot.
It almost seems like just a trick to get it to include that context.
Yeah, essentially.
Nice.
Then it's all on the dashboard, right? So save you a little time and move forward with it.
And seconds matter when you're investigating alerts. So
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, we've got a question from Stuart. And Stuart asks, can you give a bit of detail on how RBA and SOAR can help analysts focus on the highest priority events?
So probably the best example of this is we have an RBA malware detection. It sets risk score based on the severity in the antivirus logs. So a low severity is going to be a lower risk score and less likely to go off. Those are, maybe it was blocked and it was a low level, potentially unwanted program kind of deal, right? So we don't really want to see those unless it's really doing something that is problematic, right? But being able to adjust and say hey, this was a high severity, or maybe it was even a medium, but it also is from a critical host, that's going to bump the score up, right? So those are things that you can build into your alerting that will help kind of narrow down and kind of highlight those detections that are really important to you.
So basically what you're saying, the risk score for Bonzi Buddy is going to be lower than WannaCry.
I would hope so.
Great, thank you, Stuart. All right, we've got another one from Ro. Ro asks, with the implementation, can we see a risk score timeline or heat map that shows the accumulation of risk for critical accounts or systems?
I think you could probably set that up as a dashboard, since we have our RBA tuning dashboard, and that gives us an idea of how many events, how much risk per detection, and how many alerts they each would have generated. That can be a useful point for trying to see, but yeah, you could probably also break that down by the risk object itself. So, and kind of really drill down and be like, hey, this host is consistently an issue over the past 6 months. What's going on there?
Yeah, awesome. And that's an awesome additional feature that we can add to our current base of RBA items and dashboards that we deploy.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and also stay tuned for more announcements. We'll be doing a Q3 webinar sometime in Q3. And if any of you have any ideas or feedback on content, let us know. If not, stay tuned. We'll be sending out details about that once we get it all sorted out.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, you all have a great rest of the week, a great summer, and we'll see you in a couple months.
Have a nice day.